This is OnBase, your one-stop shop for solving your most pressing B2B go-to-market challenges. Each week, hosts Chris Moody and Paul Gibson talk to sales and marketing leaders to get you in-depth insights and creative strategies to set your revenue teams up for success.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the OnBase podcast. I'm your host, Chris Moody. Today, I'm very excited to talk to Sylvan Awad on optimizing demand gen for sales success. Sylvan is an accomplished and dynamic B2B and B2C marketer with extensive leadership experience and a proven track record of orchestrating and optimizing high-impact global marketing strategies to drive organizational success. Sylvan, I'm excited to talk to you. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, we're pumped to have you here. We were just talking before we hit record about some of the things that we're living daily. We just had meetings with our board and with our president collectively. So I'd love to start with what are some of the common mistakes that you see organizations making with their demand gen strategies?
That's a great question. So a lot of it is overcomplicating messaging and sometimes thinking that website leads will turn into revenue right away. So I think to summarize it, simple messaging is key in terms of trying to avoid mistakes.
Yeah, I love that. I think we have all these tools and all the technology. So sometimes we can overcomplicate things when we just need to get them in the funnel, start to see what happens and learn as we go.
Yeah, sometimes you try to do a lot of A/B testing and a lot of complicated messaging, or you're trying to oversimplify a simple problem and you're just making it even more complicated. So I think just a simple message, what problem you're trying to solve and what's the reason to believe in your product. I think that makes it even simpler for any person to understand when they're reading your content or looking at your website. So just simple is key, I think.
Awesome. I love that. It's a really good thing to remind ourselves of because we can overcomplicate things. And on the complicated angle here, alignment. I think we continue to hear sales and marketing are struggling to work together. Everyone's trying to improve how we work together. What are some tips you have on how marketing and sales can better align goals and metrics to focus on the quality of their leads over just lead volume?
I think really understanding what market they want to tap into. So in my current role, we have different metrics to go over different things. So one of the things is we're really trying to focus on getting new logos. So new deals, new companies, and understanding where each of your products is best suited for in terms of vertical. So if sales is going after a specific vertical, do they need demand gen support for that vertical, or they rather us spend more time on a different vertical because they're already spending time in that vertical? So kind of like making sure that they understand where we're going after and we understand where they're going after. And if there's correlation between both of them, then maybe have also succinct messaging. If we know how they want to sell something, because they talk to the clients day in, day out. So they know exactly what resonates with a client to get them over the line. And understanding that is really key for us when we fine tune our messaging and when we're looking at targets to go after. So I think that is key. Constant communication with sales, I think, is really needed.
Yeah, totally. I had a call with one of our heads of sales in EMEA this morning. And that was one thing we were ranting about, how we can better work together to create content, even talking about how we work together. One thing I'm curious about, you mentioned verticals, and we were just talking internally about this too. So many use cases are shared commonly across multiple verticals. Do you have any tips that you would think about there? Because sometimes I do think along the lines of overcomplicated and overcomplicating things that many marketers may think, oh, every vertical is this distinct silo. We need to do things totally separate in each vertical, when each of those verticals may have some common challenges where we could use the same content, the same strategies, the same tactics to approach each.
100%. I think it's just the way you market these different verticals. You can market to them with the same messaging so long as you're talking to them in their tone of voice. So I have a specific example where we have an enterprise video management solution system that we're selling to the finance vertical, but we did previously messaging for banking, messaging for insurance, messaging for finance. So it's kind of like we overcomplicated things when a specific case study, white paper, or use case for the finance market in general would be the same that you would target for banking, for insurance, and for finance, other verticals. I think so long as you know what's the problem you're trying to solve, sometimes the verticals have the same type of problems they're trying to solve. Maybe a branch within the same company are doing the same things that you're trying to market to, but we try to overcomplicate it. And then we're now stepping back and try to simplify it. But you're right. You could definitely use the same content for multiple verticals so long as you know how to position it for each of those different verticals.
I love that. We talked a little bit earlier about quality and not being in a quantity-based lead world. What are some of the tips that you'd share for refining a go-to-market strategy to make sure we're moving from marketing qualified leads or MQLs to pipeline and revenue?
I'm kind of like twofold on this question. I think sometimes quantity is good, but quality is better. So I think having fewer leads, but higher quality leads that generate more revenue is better than having a lot of leads and that generate a shorter amount of leads. But I think in a funnel, you do need to have a stack of multiple types of leads. So I think higher qualities are the ones that you see that come in directly to your website. If you're going after a specific market, going after corporate organization will probably yield higher value than going after smaller companies. But you also need that smaller company to be able to help you get a use case or white paper to go after that big enterprise. And you also need that big enterprise to showcase that for smaller companies, you're able to help them out. So it's a give and take, but definitely knowing who you're trying to target and having all sorts of leads with different steps in it. So let's say MQLs that are top funnel, middle funnel, and then lower funnel. The lower funnel ones will definitely be yield higher value. Hope that answers your question.
Oh, totally. It does. And I'm curious too, you talked about communicating with sales and making sure that we have plenty of high quality leads. How can marketers ensure that the leads we're creating are high quality and sales ready when we may have a love-hate relationship with forms? So we know that not everything will have a form, but what are some of the tips that you would push us on to make sure we're getting those sales ready leads?
So I've come across some instances where we think that just because a person fills in a form to read a piece of content, that's a high value lead, but it definitely doesn't always pan out to be a high value lead. Maybe it's just somebody just doing some research and finding out information, but we perceive it as a high value lead. And then we pass it already to sales and they're not ready. So I think the point there is really validating the lead before you hand it off to sales and making sure that you overqualify and know that they either have a project in mind or they're looking to get more information specifically on a product and not just in general on the company and things like that. So I think really researching that company, also seeing if it's not a bot or not, because sometimes people just fill on forms and you end up having bots. And when you send that to sales, then sales hates marketing. So validating and making sure and double checking and triple checking that the lead is a valid lead, then that makes the most sense for getting better quality leads to sales.
Totally. And we don't want sales to hate us, right?
No.
You just said that. What are some strategies that you're seeing that are working well for generating lower funnel leads at scale? So to make sure we're really connecting with sales.
Yeah, I touched it on a bit previously about having multiple types of leads in your funnel. I think the higher value ones are definitely the ones that come in through your website without any much solicitation, but they're high value because you spend a lot of time optimizing your site with quality content. So when they're searching for something, your site comes up as number one, and then they land on your site. They review the content that speaks to them with regards to what they're looking for, and then they submit a form, and then that becomes a way higher quality lead than having somebody just download content or send people emails and having clicks. So I do think in a funnel, you need all kinds of levels of leads, but the higher quality ones are the ones that come in organically. I've seen in the past anyways, you could go into an event and have high quality leads because you're speaking to somebody face to face and you know that they're looking for something. But I've seen instances where you meet people at events and they don't pan out to have a project right away. They seem super engaged and super happy to meet you. And then once they come back to their offices, you're back, you send them emails, you do follow up, and you don't hear from them for 6 months. So, or having a steady flow of optimizing your website and your organic leads. So SEO, SEM, having an always on campaign, I think in terms of SEM and SEO is really helpful to get high quality leads. At scale, it's because the more traffic you have on the site, the more people will come to your site, and hopefully the more will convert. So that kind of works hand in hand. I think an always on campaign is key as well as optimizing for SEO.
Perfect. One question I'm curious about, which we've seen this come up in other conversations too. Do you ever run into situations where you're seeing multiple leads from the same account? Because I think in a lead-driven world, sometimes we're used to just, hey, we capture contacts. And I know lots of folks talk about ABM and account-based. Almost everything you've hit on, these are principles of account-based, right? We're talking about prioritization. We're talking about relevance. We're talking about timely content. Do you have any tips for folks who may say, well, we're going after Pepsi or Microsoft or Google and may have 100 different leads from that account? Any guidance on how we should approach that as marketers?
I did have last year, I ran a program where we did content syndication. And for the same account, we had 4 or 5 people that registered to download the content. So I wouldn't say it's a lot of success, but I think it's important to speak to everybody in the company to figure out exactly who is the decision maker and who is the person that the product or the champion of that project or that initiative that you're trying to push forward. I think the more people you talk within the organization, the better chances you are of moving up in the chain to get to the right person to do it. So I think, keep at it and don't be afraid to contact everybody from that organization.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I mean, candidly, internally at DemandBase, it's one thing we talk about a lot where leads may be too small, accounts may be too big, and that buying group is right in the middle, the Goldilocks, just right. So to your point, and when we see that happen, that should be an indicator that we surround them and sales knows what to do to connect all the dots, figure out who's working together. So huge opportunities for us to continue to focus on that.
There's something that we see a lot when we go on Instagram or we do shopping. All of a sudden, you research something, then you see an ad on Instagram or on Facebook, you see it on Google, and then they just follow you around. I think that same principle applies to lead generation in the sense that if you have 5-10 people in the same organization as leads in your funnel, and you also push them ads on LinkedIn and you do SEM and you really market to that entire organization, they're going to end up seeing your ads and instinctively go to your website without even thinking about it or prompt. So I think that definitely helps being able to follow everybody or follow them, even though it seems like Big Brother, but e-commerce does it. Lead generation should do it as well.
Totally. Yeah. It's the world we live in, right?
Correct.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up our time today, we have a couple questions we love to ask every single guest. And the first, we call it good reads, but it could also be a listen. Is there a book, blog, newsletter, website, or video that you'd recommend to our podcast listeners? It could also be a podcast.
I did read as recent as January a book called The Stories That Stick by Kendra Hall. I thought it was fantastic because it just simplifies, even when you're doing presentation, you're trying to get money funding for your organization. It's just telling the story behind the story just makes it more personal and inviting, and then it just sells your product without even wanting to sell it. So I think that book is really good. I really enjoyed reading it.
Awesome. We'll check that out. One thing that I do love, if we did a word cloud of everything that we've said on this show, simplify or simplification, that's going to be one of the words that's popped up the most. I do think it's a great reminder for everyone listening that we are overcomplicating things in many instances. Sometimes we just need to simplify things and move things forward.
Yeah, that's true.
Great. And then we also love to capture good people. Could you share the names of any inspirational folks in the B2B space that you recommend we bring to the show?
Yeah, I've worked with a person called Colin Mann. He worked at Enchhouse. He was my mentor. I think he's a great B2B marketer, specifically also demand generation. I definitely recommend talking to him. My boss at Hypertech was really fantastic. He's a storyteller. So talking about stories that stick, he's really a good storyteller. Frédéric Ranger, he works now for a music company and he's a VP marketing and communication. So he was a good person also to have on your podcast. And finally, my first digital boss at TC Media called Ralph Van Colley. He's so much knowledge on everything e-commerce, everything digital. So it's definitely, I would recommend having him on the podcast as well.
Outstanding. We'll reach out to those folks. Thank you so much. And then the most important question of all, how can everyone get in touch with you after they listen to this episode?
They could definitely reach me on LinkedIn. My profile is pretty open, and so it's Sylvain Awad on LinkedIn, or they could send me an email on my personal email, which is sylvainawad@gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a great show. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. You really appreciate spending time with you and talking about all of this demand gen initiatives.
Thanks for joining us for OnBase. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by DemandBase, the only account-based experience platform built for sales and marketing alignment.